Cue opening music.
There's been a lot of interesting news this week. It feels like whenever we're about to record this this little event that we do bi-weekly, the world seems to announce the next wave of AI products and AI opportunities, AI advancements. Loads of stuff dropped. Only yesterday, isn't it? I don't know, have you got any hot takes for us, Kev?
Yeah, it's either just after we've recorded something and then the world changes, or it drops 24 hours before and don't really have enough time to get the heads up. There has been a lot of stuff in the last few days. I think what I'm seeing is quite interesting what's going on. We talked about MCP last time, and that was really the first time that we started to see a standard emerge around this whole Agentic stack. So we talked about MCP being this protocol that allowed agents to use tools and gain new superpowers, and we talked a bit about what that was and how it worked. And there has been a load of buzz about that recently, but that's pretty much it on the standardization front until a few days ago, really. And there's two other things recently that have come across my radar. The first dropped about 24 hours ago, and I don't know very much about it yet, but it is the agent-to-agent protocol, or A2A, and it's a new standard released by Google around how agents in a multi-agent system should talk to each other. And this is across boundaries, right? So across the internet. It's almost like the HTTP for agent-to-agent comms.
Yeah, right. So the MCP is really focused around maybe the tooling that an agent can use to get stuff done. And you're saying A2A is potentially the communication mechanism between agents. So it's not an alternative. It's kind of a different layer.
Yeah, it's almost like how agents kind of introduce themselves and say who they are, and what they do, and how they can help. They got like this.
We're so obsessed with anthropomorphizing these things, aren't we? It's like we're going to turn these things into people. That's the only way we can visualize it. So it's the introductions, the handshake, if you like.
The handshake, yeah, this is who I am. This is what I can do. This is, we can start talking now, and I'm going to exchange some details. And it's got some interesting concepts in there around kind of calling cards. And I think they can even pass data to each other on what they expect from a user interface and user interaction point of view as well. So as I said, it's only been released for the last 24 hours. So I was reading the docs like about an hour ago, so I don't know a huge amount about it yet. But what's interesting is when you do read those docs, there's a huge body of people that have been involved in developing this, and it's all the kind of usual names that you'd expect. The big guys are all in there, the Accentures and the Deloittes and the Caps and that kind of thing. But clearly, a large number of people have been involved in this, and Google are pushing it as a potential new standard. So I guess we'll see. When MCP came out, no one really knew it was going to take off, and then you watched it over the following couple of months, and you got that kind of hockey stick takeoff. This is hot off the press, right? So it'll be really interesting to see what people do with this, and if they start building with it and they start standardizing around it. And I think definitely something like that is needed for this kind of new agentic way of building systems. And we talked about it on one of the pods as well, about how do I share information about me and the bits about me that I want to share without kind of giving it all up. And I suppose it's almost like the beginnings of that as well, isn't it? It's kind of, right, this agent is going to deal with this agent, and this is how we're going to start to formalize that contract.
So it's that layer potentially, or the beginnings of the layer potentially, to enable agents from different organisations with different needs and different outcomes to communicate with each other in a standard way. That's like they're talking English or French, or if you pop along to Rome and you want to converse with the ice cream van, they're very multilingual in Rome, so they'll probably talk to you in any language you choose. But if you start talking to them in Italian, you're more likely to get a better response than if you're talking to them in Mandarin. So it's that kind of, it's making sure everyone's talking the same language. Is that your take on it?
No, actually, well, that's interesting because we'll come on to that in a bit. But okay. It's less about that, and it's more about kind of capability discovery, I suppose. I guess back in the day, you had a certain standard around web services and web service discovery. You could like kind of ping this endpoint and say, "Oh, I've got this web service available, and this is what it does, and this is how it works." I guess, thinking off the cuff here, but I guess it's probably there's an element of that in there as well. It's kind of this agent to agent comms and discovery and interchange. And what's interesting, that's a new standard that literally popped up 24 hours ago. But then prior to that, you had the MCP standard pop up, which was more about tool use and dynamic discovery of capability for a particular agent. And then you've got this third thing, which is kind of become more talked about recently as well, which is LoRA, or LoRA, which stands for low rank adaptation. And this is quite interesting because essentially if you need to go deeper than just prompt engineering, or RAG to do kind of augmented generation, then what people have been doing is they've been fine-tuning these base models. So I don't know, a new open source model comes onto the market and it's kind of good, but you want it to be much better at doing finance stuff. So you take the base model and you fine-tune it. And you can do that on stuff like AI Foundry and various things on Hugging Face. And the output is another model, which is based off of the original model, but it's specialized around doing a particular thing. So you see this a lot with code generation and these small models. So somebody releases a small model, one that you can run locally on your machine without needing a million GPUs in a data center somewhere. And then you can fine tune that to do code generation. And it means you can have a local model, which is very, very capable. If you try and have a general purpose model, which is very, very capable, almost impossible to run that locally because it needs so much grunt. So these smaller models definitely benefit from that. Except along came low rank adaptation, which I believe it started off as a way to basically improve that process of fine training. But now it seems to be emerging as a standard in its own right. And what it does is, instead of creating a whole new model, so you've got your base model and then you fine tune it, you end up with a completely different model. This is like, it creates this adapter layer. The base model is unchanged, and then you inject into it this LoRA thing that you've fine tuned, and it becomes more capable and starts operating, with a different set of weights and different parameters, and so you can tune it for different types of personality or different kind of jobs in the same way that you fine tune a model, but you don't have a complete new model. It's tied to the base model. Right. So it's like, I don't know, you've got an engine or something, and you're not creating a whole new engine. You're just creating plugins to make that engine behave differently.
Yeah. So I mean, again, this is hot off the press, a bit like the A2A thing. So I've not seen this. I've not seen this at all. Is this? It sounds similar to the kind of distillation approach that may be like the DeepSeek wave that mess that caused a few. Was it weeks ago, days ago, months ago? I don't know. Time seems to be travelling at a different rate. But where they managed to reduce the costs so much, really, of running this model, because they basically took the main model and effectively made it smaller. Is it similar to that, or is it a slightly different approach?
So it's a completely different approach, but it's quite astute because it is similar in the impact. So the impact of the DeepSeek way of doing things, which was through pure reinforcement learning, meant that they could train that model much quicker and more cheaply. And it also meant, with the distillation stuff, they cheated by using some of these bigger models like OpenAI's GPT-4 to help train their models. So that kind of distillation is it's taking a big model that's really, really powerful, and it's using that to train a less powerful model, but you can get the less powerful model and the smaller model almost as good because it's learning from this kind of big daddy model.
Right, yeah, it doesn't have to learn.
But it did kind of, so that does help reduce the footprint of these models and make them cheaper. And ultimately, LoRA will achieve the same thing, because if you're an enterprise, you might roll out, you might standardize around a particular base model. So let's say, it's GPT-5 now, or whatever it is. You decide that's kind of your base model. But you want, 3 different agentic solutions or 3 different kind of AI solutions that are tailored to different verticals. You can create a LoRA adapter. So instead of creating a whole new model, you can create a LoRA adapter for your base model, and then you can kind of inject it in to do the stuff you want to do in that domain, and then take it out, and then take your other LoRA adapter that you've created,
right,
and inject that in to do that other task. So, so you can see, I suppose, in the equivalent, or whatever the agentic equivalent of SaaS is, you could see that could almost be used in a multi-tenant environment or something like that.
Yeah. And as I said, brand new stuff. So I guess this is really, like the A2A stuff, really only good for experimenting right now and figuring out what it is. There seems to be a lot of pushback you see with all these new approaches, and you're still seeing it now with MCP, because MCP is obviously still very new. That the pushback is, well, it's not production ready. It's got these issues of coming up against these problems, this friction, can't build with it, can't develop with it. What's the security layer? All this kind of stuff. And it feels like people are trying to run maybe before they can walk on this, or missing the point of where we are in that cycle. Because all of these new technologies and these new approaches, really what they're doing is they're fundamentally changing the way that we think about building stuff, right? So it's not like having just a new shiny IDE or a new coding language, or a new server architecture. It's not an evolution of something that already exists. This is a whole new approach of constructing and building and designing and thinking about software as a whole. This is really an opportunity to start to learn that, right, before it becomes, or just the norm, because this is the way everything is going.
Yeah. The emergence of these standards is just that. They are the emergence of new standards, and we're seeing the first ones essentially start to come out and surface now. So yeah, is it something you should be jumping on right now? You did point out there that there were various security concerns around MCP because it didn't really have security baked into its core protocol. Is that a reason to avoid it? No, probably not. You got to kind of understand where we are in this whole cycle, and I suppose you've got to weigh up the pros and cons. Doing nothing could be as dangerous right now as pushing out a whole system into production based on these really early standards that are still evolving. So which version of the danger do you choose, I suppose?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot recently with I've been going to a number of different events and catching up with kind of various CXOs around the place. And there seems to be this general feeling, I suppose, that every boardroom is doing this bit of a strange dance, really. They've kind of got a drafting pencil in one hand and a calculator in the other, as they're trying to figure out whether AI is worth it at this point. Am I going to see real benefit on my business this quarter if I start deploying some of this tooling or experimenting with some of these new methods? And it feels like that's kind of, it's missing the point, really, because as you said, we need to be thinking about what's the cost of not doing this, what's the cost of not keeping up, what's the cost of not being aware of what this is doing, not only to our particular business but our industry, maybe even all industries, as it changes the way that we think about work and the economics and the way that all these processes hang together anyway. Thinking about AI in terms of whether or not I'm going to get an ROI on it today is, as I said, I don't think the right approach. I think we've got to be thinking about, AI as a capability. It's more foundational, isn't it? It's more akin to like the internet was, or, there's not an ROI for internet anymore. You don't think about that. It's like, we need it. Everything's based around it. That's how we connect, or mobility and mobile devices, or even further back than that, you think about electricity. You don't need an ROI for electricity. It's just foundational to the way the world works.
I firmly believe that it is foundational, and it's changing the game, like 100%. But there are probably a lot of people that aren't there yet, and don't think like that. And that if it isn't inevitable for you, then why would you rush to do anything about it, I suppose? When you were talking now, I was thinking about kind of e-commerce, and now you couldn't really imagine life without it. Majority of people do their shopping online, or at least for some aspects of the things that they want to buy. But in the early days, that wasn't how most people shopped. And so where was the danger? Why would you invest in e-com if you knew that was where most people weren't going to shop, and the habits hadn't formed, and the paradigm wasn't really in people's heads? It wasn't the normal way of doing things. And a good friend of mine started his career in e-com department for a well-known brand, and there were two of them. And when he left, which was only a few years ago, that was a £2 billion department, right? So that's the kind of effect that you're seeing now, and it will take a long time. It will take years, but it is happening, and it is happening now. And it's just about when you're going to make the jump. When you at some point you will, right? At some point you're going to want to invest in this, and you're going to be starting from zero when you do. So you're making a bet on when the tide is going to turn or the wave is going to break, I suppose.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this as well, because I think there are a number of people that are still thinking about this AI transformation as almost like, well, I'll buy the product when it's ready. Yeah, I'll buy it and customize it. It's a COTS product, right? Customize it off the shelf. But I think that's the way to think about it. I think the way to think about this is because, as we said, obviously we're primarily thinking about engineering and how software is built, but it's changing the way that software is being designed and constructed, and we're expecting that. But more broadly, I think it's fundamentally changing the way that businesses are going to operate, and the way that all roles, particularly in the knowledge worker space, are going to function. So it's not a sense of you being able to engage with it when it's ready, because you won't be ready. And your organization won't be ready because it's such a foundational change. And this is the time where it's like being back at school, right? School kids need to learn to not only, do their sums, but also how to operate within the world and deal with social structures and function in a broader landscape. And it feels like that is happening right now, but to all of us all over again, because as individuals and as organizations, we've got to somehow build up the muscle memory to be able to operate in an AI first, AI native, AI by default, AI like electricity kind of world. So we can't wait until it's ready, because we have to learn how to do it. We have to learn how to function kind of in this space. So it's a really dangerous game to be playing, I think, about waiting, because as you say, when you are ready to jump, you're going to be a long way downstream, from where the action's really happening.
Yeah, but I think, history always teaches us lessons, doesn't it? And it does tend to repeat. And I think it will do exactly the same thing this time around. I was speaking to somebody not that long ago about AI and how it's sort of, everyone's trying to work out what to do with it and how it's going to impact them. And he was sort of talking about the cloud and the move to the cloud, and how, I think at the time he was working for kind of a big infrastructure company, the equivalent of VMware, and they built their business on essentially spinning up virtual machines. And I remember dealing with a company that did that and going through this huge system design, and the way the whole thing was priced, right? They spend weeks or months up front doing this kind of blueprint design, that you need these servers, this services, this is your VNet, not VNet, whatever the equivalent was then. And these are your firewall rules, and this whole kind of design process took ages, and it was expensive. And then they had a commissioning phase, and that took ages and was expensive too. And they were spinning up these VMs, and they were configuring all of them, and they were doing the load balancing, and they were doing the failover and all that kind of stuff. And then you needed the service contract, which was kind of a multi-year contract to do all the patching and support. And I remember that. And it's those organizations, and this guy I was talking to was in one of those organizations. And he said, we just missed the whole move to the cloud and to cloud native. Lots of those type of companies, mass redundancies, had to change their entire business model, because that business model did not work in a cloud native world where you were spinning up stuff, spinning down stuff, moved to pay as you go. People didn't want to spend that kind of money on the long lead times in infrastructure. Didn't want to wait 6 months to get an environment up and running when you could do it in days and weeks. So that kind of fundamental change is happening right now, but in a completely different way, with a completely different technology. Back then, people missed that, and they stuck their head in the ground and they didn't do anything, and there was an impact. And I think you'll see the same thing happening again, because that's what happens. The cloud isn't the only example. We've seen it before. But that's not a smart thing to do, right? That's definitely not the smart thing to do. And the smarter companies were at least understood that this change was happening, and that they needed to do some kind of due diligence and early research and early modelling of what their business would look like in the future. And I think, at the very least, That's what everybody needs to be doing now. And we are so early. We think we've got these wonderful tools, this crazy new ability to chat with this otherworldly intelligence, right? But it's really early. As I think Sam Altman, didn't he say something along the lines of models will never be as stupid as the models that we're playing with today, right? So this thing is on an exponential curve towards, first of all, artificial general intelligence and then artificial superintelligence. It's unstoppable, and you need to decide when you're going to start taking a long, hard look at it, because it's going to completely change the game. It sounds like hyperbole, doesn't it? But it's not. It's not just me saying this, right? There's that. I think I posted something the other day. This quote by Bill Gates, which I think his words were, "It is going to upend the software industry." Upend, and he talks about it as the biggest revolution in software. So it's not like he's not using small words there. These are massive connotations. And that's why I'm really, really excited about it. I'm all over it. But it's why most people are also terrified of it and don't really want to look up above the parapet, because they don't know what they might find.
I mean, so often as well with these kind of shifts and shifts that are much smaller, you mentioned cloud there. It's not actually the technology that holds back organizations with adoption. It's the people and the processes, right? I think one of the major things, again, taking a cloud example, that slowed down cloud adoption wasn't the ability for individuals to deal with the technology or re-platform their systems or anything like that. It was their ability to change the mindset from capex to opex in terms of these data centers. We're just going to pay for them out of this budget. This kind of infrastructure piece, we're going to pay for them out of this capital budget. It's done. No, we've got to pay as you go. How does that work? How do you know what it's going to cost each month? How do you know what it's going to cost each year? What's the lifetime cost of this project, of this program? And it was solving those kind of problems that actually held back. And it's that transformation in the way of thinking, which I think is really adjacent to the way that this AI transformation, the way we think, is operating.
And I find that fascinating. I love that. But it is also incredibly challenging. And some of the challenges that were obvious at the time in that whole kind of shift to OpEx and cloud native was, well, how am I going to cost control this thing? How do I know how much I'm going to spend? I don't want to like a credit card without any limits on. I need to know how much this thing's going to cost me. That span up whole new things that didn't really exist before, like FinOps and well architected and cost calculators for pay-as-you-go services that could give you some kind of understanding of what your monthly cost would be based on how many users you're going to have, what kind of data ingress and ingress you're going to have. And then the whole security model as well, and the way that evolved from everything's public by default to everything's kind of VNet by default. The whole cloud journey was a 10 to 15 year maturity curve, and there were huge innovations and problems that were solved along the way. And we're going on that same journey, but we're only a year in, I reckon.
Maybe, not even that. Not even that. Absolutely. And we talk a lot about businesses should do this or organisations need to think about this, but fundamentally underneath it all is people, right? There are people either sitting at the top of the tree or working in the trenches who are looking at AI and trying to think, well, where am I going to spend my department budget, or where am I going to spend my personal development budget, or where am I going to spend my coffee money? At the end of the day, if organizations don't change, they're going to disappear or shrink, but the people are going to have to find new roles and find new homes for themselves and find their own space in this world. And so this kind of ROI piece is really the wrong question to be asked. I mean, better questions to ask, things like, what could I do if I had superpowers? What could my team build if we were super efficient, or we had these new skills and new tools? What the business looks like, if all the boring bits were automated away? What would I do with my job if the thing that takes up 20%, 30%, 50% of my time, which is just the same again and again and again, was done on my behalf by the bots? And it really comes down to what's the cost of not acting, isn't it? Because that's what's going to happen. The teams are going to get superpowers. Individuals are going to become superhuman. The boring stuff is going to be automated away. So what's going to be left, either for you as an individual or for the organisation as a whole? That's where this is the time to really learn and to really to get on this maturity curve as well. We talk about how the technology itself is on a maturity curve and our adoption of it will continue to mature and adapt and standards will emerge and all the rest of it. But as practitioners and as people, as individuals, we also need to mature because, again, it's such a transformational moment that all of us are in nursery school at the moment, right? We're all in reception, and we need to level up so that as the thing progresses, we can progress with that tide.
I think one of the problems is it's still so early that we don't really have the language to even speak about it. So we struggle to explain the concepts to people because the language hasn't formalized yet. So we talk about agents all the time, but that's got like several different meanings, all the way from just some automation with a bit of LLM in there to something that is fully autonomous, making decisions and making mistakes, acting with true agency. That needs to be solved. If you think, it's difficult not to use the cloud as an analogy, but if you look at the cloud and when we started moving to this platform as a service or cloud native model, things started to crystallize for us. Like we had this concept of, getting a bit technical now, but we had this concept of lambda functions or functions. These were a thing in the cloud space that we could hold, some code or a behavior, and could be spun up and act and then spun down again. And then we had this concept very early on of blob storage, right? So this kind of elastic storage for binary data. So once that had been invented, I think blob storage was the first one anyone was really talking about was S3 on Amazon. You started to understand, okay, well, this is a concept of this elastic storage service that we can use. And then, of course, that got duplicated by all the other cloud agencies, and we got functions, and everyone ended up with functions, and then we had all kinds of stuff, but we could name them, and so you could start talking to customers about cloud native architectures, and you could say, right, this is what you used to do, but you don't need to think like that anymore, and you don't need to think about the capacity you need up front, and you don't need to do this kind of months-long infrastructure design, because you can use these elastic services that scale your compute as the demand grows, and scales your cost as the demand grows, which you may or might not think is a good thing. But we were able to talk in terms of these concrete services that existed and what they did and the benefits they brought. And at the moment, we're trying to talk about agentic computing or agentic AI, and that's where we stop. There's no other vocabulary, right? So I think that needs to change. And even like internally, we've been, spinning up some R&D projects and that kind of thing, and we're trying to articulate the kind of behaviours and systems that we want to build, and we're having to give them names. And I think this is quite fascinating, really. So one of the ones we're exploring at the moment is, well, what happens when you've essentially got this computer system where it operates on brokerage. So you've got a number of agencies, and they're all offering up products. And then you've got a broker who's on behalf of the customer trying to find the best product match for that customer. And then those systems exist, right, today. So what does that same system look like in an agentic world? And you start kind of exploring that concept, and then when you realise you've introduced intelligence and autonomy, and they can start making decisions that you would be very hard to do in a traditional deterministic system, you can see quite quickly how you can elevate the value in that system. So now it's able to the broker's not just able to surface up those products and find the best match. Those agents, if you like, or that broker is able to negotiate on your behalf and get the best deal live in real time, or adapt your preferences in real time. So it introduces new possibilities, but it lacks vocabulary. So when we were talking about this system that we wanted to try and build, we came up with this term that we're now using internally to describe what we're trying to build as a market maker, right? So that is a pattern that exists, and people understand what that is, and they understand how that's already happens today in trading rooms and that kind of thing. And so you're talking about an agentic system, but it's not a nameless agentic system anymore. This particular kind of agentic system that we're building has a market maker agent or agents. And so we started riffing off that, and we've started coming up with more patterns and more names and that kind of thing. But I don't know if that's going to be a thing. I think something like that needs to be a thing as we kind of go on this journey over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's why it's really unhelpful when marketing departments get hold of some of these terms and start slapping them on everything. It was only, maybe end of last year, every SaaS product on the planet just slapped AI on the end of it. Even what did it do? It had a chatbot or something, I don't know, or it had an extra little report that you kicked out the end. And now we're having the same thing again with agents. When this is an agentic system, or these are agents we've got working for us. Well, I see something like Salesforce agents the other day. Everything's got an agent. Everything's using agentic. Really, it's mostly, I mean, maybe I'm doing them all a disservice, but fundamentally it seems to be automating some things. They're basically workflow engines, which is polluting the terms. It's actually quite difficult for us to find meaningful language that people understand because say it's been hijacked.
Yeah, but then I think it's more like I'm using the cloud, I'm using VMs, or I'm using the cloud, I'm using all the bells and whistles and the cloud native stuff. And then there's a myriad of things in between, right? So you could say, well, yeah, we're using agents, but are you using them at level 1 or level 10?
Right.
And I think what we're seeing at the moment is a load of level 1 stuff, and over the next few years, that's going to be dialed right up. And when I think about agentic systems and what I want to see and what I want to build and how I imagine the future, my head's off in like Cyberpunk 2077 somewhere. And
you got your holographic avatar, you're ready to go.
So they're the agentic systems that are coming, and they're the agentic systems that are dialed up to 11 that have completely reimagined how we run businesses and what software looks like. Mm-hmm. And then what we got at the moment is we've got the kind of level 1 agentic stuff that's starting to come through, which, like I said, is a bit of automation with some LLM sprinkles.
Yeah, and these things have to be about outcomes, right? We're obviously quite into the tech, and a number of people that we know are now kind of listening and watching this stuff are quite interested in the tech and the inputs and the mechanisms of getting to it. But vast majority of organizations just care about the outcomes. And it makes me wonder whether or not the people that are talking about their AI strategy and how they're going to apply their AI strategy to their business, again, are kind of got the wrong end of the stick, really, because it frames AI as the destination, as the AI as the outcome, right. But it's not. Again, I could go back to maybe a silly example. It's a bit like having an electricity strategy, right? or an internet strategy. It's not really a thing. I mean, yeah, sure, you might have guidelines or templates or standards or security protocols or things that are aligned to a specific technology like electricity or like AI, but it's not a standalone strategy, right? It's about how it's woven into the fabric of the organization to enable the organization to achieve its strategies. So it's not really a strategy at all. It's more the fuel, right? It should be the rocket fuel.
One has always followed the other, hasn't it? Because you'd say the same thing about cloud or mobile, or like back in the day, people they needed a mobile strategy. Now people just need an app strategy, or they need a B2B or a B2C strategy. It's like the app is just a given, and the cloud is just a given. But when it doesn't exist, when your organization is sitting at the starting line, everyone's just jumped on this kind of AI strategy, or because that's just the obvious thing, like we don't have it, we need it, rather than understanding what it is and where it's going, and then looking more broadly, I suppose, at your business and how that needs to change, and some of the things that are now possible, and enter the conversation that wouldn't have done had that technology not been there.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think that is everyone's default, right? So there's this new thing, there's a sense that it's a big deal, but we don't know anything about it, therefore we need a strategy for it. But I think this is different. I think because when cloud came along, it didn't fundamentally change the way that businesses operated and functioned. Okay, it changed the way maybe their software systems were hosted, and it changed the way their cost models operated, but it didn't change the general functioning in day to day of kind of how their employees worked and how their customers interacted. It didn't change the nature of what it was that these organizations were, which I believe that AI is much more likely to do. You could spend months building an AI strategy, right? And then you hire your head of AI and you build your AI roadmap and you mess around with a few pilot schemes and you can announce yourself as being AI driven. All the while you've ended up with a couple of Copilot licenses and you haven't actually changed anything. It's only when you're thinking, how can AI provide the fuel to deliver on my organization's aims? Or as an individual, how can AI provide the fuel to deliver my aims, to get to where I want to be? I think you've really grasped the nature of what this change is.
I think people don't appreciate that the luxury of time is perhaps not something they have. And this is where it's dangerous, I think, and this is where it's urgent. And I think maybe, unless you've lifted your head up and looked above the parapet, then maybe you don't realise that. And maybe that's where most organisations still are. But there's one guy I'm following on X, and I think he posted something along the lines of, you need to look at this shift that's happening now and this kind of the change that's going to be happening because of AI, like you looked at COVID. So he said, yeah, like, when COVID happened and you had to react, you had to figure out how to get your workforce changing their whole mode of operation. You had to get them online. You had to figure out how to do remote work, right? You had no choice. It was adapt or die, right? That was and people did because they had to. But now we're in this situation where this guy is basically saying, and I don't entirely disagree with him, that this is just as urgent, and it's urgent because the speed at which it's moving and evolving and the significance of the change that it could have. So you need to treat it as urgently as you treated COVID. Is his argument.
Yeah.
And I think that's not the default. I think the default is, and maybe it's the default in our industry because it's, we're the people that I suppose are being impacted immediately by it and are just bombarded with it day in, day out. But it's not the default for, I don't think, the majority of industries at the moment, which means they don't see that same urgency.
Yeah. It is astonishing the pace at which it's moving. I mean, to bring us back to where we started, the MCP thing, which basically was nothing, then it was a fringe buzz kind of comment, then it was an adopted standard, and now it's being shot down because it's not someone's personal preference. That whole kind of cycle happened in a space of about 4 weeks. It's crazy, right?
I think it was about 2 months, yeah, but it was so short, even for tech kind of timescales. And yeah, I think it was Google again this week that announced that they were now building it into their products as well after Microsoft had done it the week before. So yeah, within 2 months you've had something that's just like, kind of got this new thing, think it might be quite useful. So like everyone's adopted it as a standard.
Yeah, and obviously that's a very technical example, but at the other end, I was talking to people at this event the other week, and they were talking about the cost, the additional costs that are coming in because of, primarily I'm moaning about Copilot licenses and how much they cost per user, particularly if you've got a large organization. It's a significant dent in their budgets, and it's got to the point where obviously everyone's been budgeting over the last couple of months. They've got to find a space for this money. This money is in the budget. It's there. It's done. It's just normal. It's just default. No one's quite sure what to do with it or how to use it, but it's just the default now. People have got thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds to spend on Copilot licenses, and where does it come from? They've got no choice but to do it, even though, as I say, most don't know what to do. That's
also worrying, though, isn't it? Don't you think? I mean, that is essentially the technology industry has forced all this stuff upon us, whether we want it or not. So even us who kind of, I suppose, thrive on this kind of disruption and this kind of new technology, we didn't really get a choice. It's kind of like first OpenAI landed this thing, then Microsoft got involved, and Google came out with all the stuff they've been working on forever, and Meta joined the party. And so now the whole kind of techosphere is going, right, this is what's happening, this is what we're doing. And you're like, okay, well, we better start figuring out what this means then. And then so that's on technology front. It's like they almost, basically, you could paraphrase what happened to, we've invented this new tech, and you're all going to use it whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened to us. And then what you're seeing now is essentially the same thing, but it's having a massive, like you said, it's got a financial impact. So Microsoft and Google have both gone, well, we think everyone is going to really benefit from this, and we can also charge for it. So we'll just bundle it. Like, that's their strategy. We'll bundle it, but we'll just increase the cost of the bundle, and then you don't get a choice. So you're right. It's like now you're forced to put your hand in your pocket to buy it. You might not even be using it. So now you've got to you're being forced to start using it, which means you're being forced to start thinking about how it's going to impact your business and the changes it might make. And maybe you're being forced to think about your cost base and make some efficiencies. And it does feel a bit like the wrong way around. We should be adopting technology because of a benefit, that rather than having it forced upon us and then being made to find the benefit, which is what's going on, isn't it?
And it is. You can see how CIOs in particular have got this fear of missing out, this FOMO thing going on, because I mean, you could say no to sticking the Copilot stuff on your budget, but that's not a good look, is it? Even if you're not quite sure what to do it, or you're pretty sure that half people are not using it, and 3/4 of them that are not using it properly. Their grammar's being corrected and they're automating some emails, but that's about the limit. But you say that there is no choice, and you wonder if the pace of this, what that's doing, I suppose, individuals' ability to make rational decisions about kind of what's right for them and where they are. I was thinking about this the other day. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed, but the speed at which Cursor seem to be releasing new features at the moment is kind of insane, right? It's just drop after drop after drop. I mean, do they vibe code their own product? Do they use Cursor to build Cursor? I don't know, but if you're not using this latest and greatest stuff, it's now so in your face and it's so there. Is that affecting the decision making of everybody to just say, well, I've got to be using it because otherwise I'm missing out on it?
I think it is absolutely affecting the decision process. I don't think Cursor. I don't think Cursor vibe code, but I do believe that Cursor used Cursor to develop Cursor in the same way that C++ was used to develop a C++ compiler eventually. There's a few interesting things on that whole debate, because it was the CEO of Shopify, wasn't it? Did you see that? It came out this week.
Oh, the memo.
The memo. Yeah, did you see that?
Well, I mean, we have to be. Do we have to be guarded on revealing our opinions on the memo?
I mean, there's an open kitchen, right? I'd say so. Is it being forced on people? You look at that memo, and it's not too dissimilar, to be fair, to what we're starting to do ourselves, which is like, hey, we want to try and emote a behavior change. So what the CEO of Shopify had clearly done, or Shopify as a company rather had done, is they'd gone and just bought everything and given it to their staff. Like, hey, look, guys, now you've got Cursor Code, you've got the IDE, you've got ChatGPT, you've got all the AI goodies. We've bought everyone an AI goodie bag. And the tone of the email, I mean, it's really funny because we had a chat about this in one of our Slack channels, and there was different perspectives on it. And I think I had a different perspective as, somebody that runs a business to perhaps some of my peers who don't. And I could see the difficult tightrope this guy was trying to walk, right? It's like, because my take on this is like, everybody's a little bit scared. So staff are a little bit scared, right? But they maybe don't appreciate that the exec are a little bit scared too, right? Yes. So they're trying to figure out, I've got this AI tsunami that's hitting the world, and it's going to hit my business, and what am I going to do, and how am I going to prepare for it? Shopify went and bought all these AI goodie bags for people, and reading between the lines is like, why are they not dipping into the goodie bags? Why have they just left them on their desks?
Yeah,
I want people to be using the goodie bags.
You didn't have to read between the lines too much, did you, really? I mean, it was basically a case of use it or get out. Seemed to be the thrust.
I didn't quite say that, but the language was a bit unfortunate, but not a mistake that we wouldn't all make. I think, what was his phrasing? Something like, well, yeah, you don't have to use it, but in all honesty, I don't think it's going to work out well for you. So I think that was the kind of sentiment.
Well, there was a real sense, I think, from it. And yes, you could argue the tone wasn't right, or you could argue the communication medium could have been better. But there was a real sense of urgency behind it. As you say, there wasn't that the exec came across fearful, but there was definitely a sense of urgency. It's not acceptable. We're going to take this organisation forward, and it's not acceptable for you to not be on the train. If you're not on it, you're going to be holding us back. That was, I think, what they were trying to communicate somehow, which is, I guess, fundamentally true. And if that's coming from the leadership, then really that's an exciting place to be, right? You kind of, as a member of that team, you want to grab hold of it and chase it, don't you?
You do. You'd think, but the pushback that we were having in those Slack channels was, from an employee's perspective, it's kind of like, well, this sounds quite threatening, and you're telling me I have to do this thing, but you're not telling me how. I don't know how you can read this or how it was meant, but there is a perspective where you could say, right, well, this goodie bag was dumped on my desk. I didn't ask for it. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know why I need it. Right. So if the business is not taking their employees on a journey, then I think they're opening themselves up to this kind of pushback. And he got a lot of pushback. And it's definitely, you've got to temper the urgency and the desire to get people's behaviour changing, because that's really hard, by the way. It takes a long time, and you need to be very deliberate about it. And perhaps what didn't come through in that email, and I didn't read all of it, I only read the snippet, so maybe that's addressed later on. I don't know. But what didn't come through in the leaked bit was, well, this is what we're doing. We've got all these programs running here. We're doing all this stuff. We've given you extra time to do this. We've got a great little group over here. But you need to take people on that journey, because they're not just going to, it's not like you can just flip a switch and everyone's behaviour changes and they all know why they're doing what they're doing and why they have to do something differently now.
Yeah, it really underlines that earlier point, doesn't it? That it's process and people that slows these things down and prevents adoption and ultimately will break an organisation, right? If you can't take your people with you and you can't adapt to everybody's processes along the way, you're going to fail. And that's as much a challenge in such a transformational shift that we've got right now, and just figuring out what the right technology is and how it works.
The other thing, by the way, that's interesting, it kind of touches on both of these things, Cursor and the tech companies not really giving people much of a choice, is this week Microsoft pushed out their answer to Cursor.
I missed this.
Now, this was a few days ago. So VS Code, which is VS Code is like the most popular IDE, free and open source, but we'll explore that in a minute. And then what happened was Cursor forked that. So they took a copy of the VS Code, and then they charged for it. So they said, okay, this is an open source, but we're going to charge for this. And you have to charge for it because it's using all these AI smarts under the hood and it costs money. And they've become, what, £100 billion company or something.
The numbers are insane, if they're true.
Very short amount of time.
With very few employees.
Yeah, it's incredible. And everyone's sort of hailing this as one of the, well, this is what the future looks like for AI native companies and that kind of thing. But Microsoft this week, when after sitting on this for a long time in the current world, which is probably like 3 months.
Yeah.
They went, okay, well, now we're going to release all our goodies for VS Code, and now it's got agent stuff too. So, now for the first time, we're starting to operate at the same level of capability as Cursor. And you could expect potentially the same kind of productivity through VS Code now that you can get on Cursor. And this is what it's similar to what I did when Slack came out, and then Teams, and then they dialed up the volume on Teams, and the Death Star laser kind of focused on Slack. And it feels like Microsoft's Death Star laser might be focusing on Cursor right now, because just after they released the VS Code with agent mode, they also started clamping down on this license that they hadn't bothered enforcing on their extensions. So VS Code has a whole bunch of extensions for developing in Microsoft languages and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And Cursor, of course, because it was a fork of VS Code, could just use all of them. But now Microsoft said, no, you can't do that, because actually it's our license, and we're allowing the use of that through VS Code, but we're not allowing the use of that through third parties such as Cursor.
Right.
So all of a sudden, all these extensions that like a massive amount of developers use and rely on are not going to work on Cursor. which is kind of interesting.
It is interesting, and that means that Microsoft are treading a difficult tightrope, right? Because they've got to get that right. Like, I mean, this is the first I've heard of it, right? So they have to get that integration with VS Code right, so that people are happy to use it. Otherwise, they're just going to become the enemy, the bad boys of the developer community. And Microsoft have been on an up and down curve in the developer community. Developers have generally liked Microsoft. Microsoft have been very good at fostering that community. But if all of a sudden they become, I don't know, the gatekeepers trying to take away the fun sweets, it's a difficult line. You can see why they're doing it, but it's a difficult line to tread.
Yeah. But I suppose that kind of shows you things are getting real now.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Microsoft are now taking it seriously, and they tend to be, as we know, they're the enterprise behemoth. They understand enterprise.
And I think the other thing that kind of says to me is now that Microsoft have gone the whole hog and put that new mode into VS Code, which is the kind of flagship dev tool that everybody has, there's a mark of maturity there, because Microsoft normally come along a few weeks or months after everybody else, once they've done all their due diligence and they've figured out the safety and security aspects and they're happy enough with where things are at. And so they are deliberately slower, but when they get there, they tend to dial up the playbook and start trying to take out the young upstarts that have got there slightly before them.
Nice. Well, I think that's it for this week. I think that's the pod.